Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video we're taking a first look at a brand new Shadow Pokemon in the world of Pokemon Go, Shadow Araquanid. Shadow Araquanid's release has quite a lot of hype around it, as Araquanid already has a ton of bulk, but with the extra damage from being a Shadow, it could get some very interesting bug bite breakpoints. Now you can encounter Shadow Dewpider by doing the female water rocket grunts, although it does share those grunts with Froakie and with Krabby. Today, I'm going to be running a very unbalanced team of Diggersby lead with Shadow Celio safe switch and Shadow Araquanid as the closer to test out this Pokemon and see how it performs. So, without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we pick up a very bad lead, leading Diggersby into Feraligatr. I'm going to farm up, try for the Hydro Cannon catch, but my opponent is much too patient. They bank back-to-back Hydro Cannons, they send in Licky Licky, but not only is this a very good bait out, as my Araquanid will not have to deal with Licky Licky, but Shadow Celio of this much energy is about to absolutely feast. I normally have pretty bad IVs on my Shadow Pokemon. I'm very lucky that this is actually the rank 1 Shadow Celio. It's one of the only rank 1 Shadows that I have in my collection, and it's going to pay off here momentarily, as I'm able to grab not 1, but 2 shields as the rank 1 Celio survives on 1 HP. Now, my opponent is suddenly at a pretty big disadvantage, as they are down 2 shields to 0. They do have back-to-back Hydro Cannons loaded on the Feraligatr, but honestly, I'm not too worried about that. Instead, I'm just going to look to send in Diggersby and farm up as much energy as I possibly can. My goal is to try and exit with the Scorching Sands loaded, so that way I'll be able to get some nice chip damage onto that Feraligatr. Licky Licky fires off yet another Body Slam. I'm firmly in Hydro Cannon range, but I feel pretty comfortable exchanging a shield when they fire off the Hydro Cannon for getting my Scorching Sands off. I fire off the Scorching Sands, my opponent either does not throw or they end up getting 1-turn bring-in. Scorching Sands is going to land. Now I can pivot into Shadow Araquanid, and in the back is Tinkaton. Now you may notice, despite the fact that Bug Bite is double resisted here, these Bug Bites are shredding through Tinkaton's HP. And that's because if you run a Shadow Araquanid that has a little bit of attack, you can actually do 2 damage per Bug Bite to Tinkaton instead of the usual 1. And that is a massive difference maker, as just by the Water Pulse and the Bug Bites, Tinkaton has almost been fully KO'd. I'm pretty confident Gigaton Hammer will do more here than Hydro Cannon, so I end up double shielding Gigatons, and I fire off the Water Pulse just to knock out the Tinkaton. Back in comes Feraligatr. Feraligatr has all the energy in the world, but what they don't have is a lot of HP. Hydro Cannon is going to connect. I farm up, switching into the Diggersby, and this should set up a guaranteed win condition, because they are in 1 Bug Bite range, so I can send in Araquanid, snipe them down with a Bug Bite, and take the game 1 win. Hopping into game number 2, leading Diggersby into Shadow Fortress, this is a very favorable lead. Now this team is ABA weak to just about everything, but I did like the fact that Diggersby lead puts you in a pretty good spot against basically every Bug Bite Fortress team, as a lot of Bug Bite Fortress teams end up being pretty weak to Diggersby across the board. And my opponent ends up proving this correct as they bank a ton of energy and then send in Licky Licky. Unfortunately, I don't have a strong answer to Licky Licky in the back. Realistically, I need to save the Diggersby because Diggersby is going to be my best way of getting rid of all that energy on the fortress. So I farm up and switch into the Shadow Celio to get a catch and sneak. This guarantees that I caught a Body Slam, as it would never throw a Shadow Ball at the normal type Diggersby, and Shadow Celio is very bulky, so I'm very comfortable absorbing what could be a Shadow Ball. They do go for the Shadow Ball, in comes the Fortress. Fortress will get a farm down, but I'm going to get a Surf, and Surf is going to do some pretty massive damage onto the Shadow Fortress. Shadow Fortress gets the full farm down, but now back in comes the Diggersby. Even though this Fortress has a massive amount of energy, they can't really do a lot of damage onto the Diggersby. I'm still outside of range where a Sand Tomb or Rock Tomb would knock me out, so I just go for the Fire Punch right away, and my opponent puts up the shield. They're very clearly wanting to try and get a debuff onto my final Pokemon, and honestly, I feel pretty okay with that. I'm just going to trust in 2-shield Shadow Araquanid. In comes Araquanid, my opponent will make the Rock Tomb, and I'm going to put up the shield. Rock Tomb would just simply do too much damage. In the back is Galarian Moltres, and being at -1 is a little bit unfortunate here. Although even for being at -1, these Shadow Bug Bites are shredding through the Moltres. I fire off the Water Pulse, Moltres desperately trying to get to the back-to-back flies, and they do not get there. Even at -1 attack, Araquanid on an absolute rampage. We fire off the Water Pulse, KOing that Licky Licky. All that's left in the back is the low health Fortress. Fortress gets bug bitten down, and that's a good game. We pick up a disastrously bad lead in the next match, beating Diggersby into Shadow Primeape. Not only is this team ABA weak to flyers, but it's also ABA weak to fighters like Shadow Primeape, so I'm in quite a lot of trouble here. My Fire Punch bait does get the shield. I'm expecting they'll CMP time me, so I save the energy and get the catch onto the Shadow Araquanid. Araquanid catches an Ice Punch, so now I know their moveset, and Primeape farms up. Primeape farms to the moon, they bank a ton of energy, and they send out Aegislash. This is very bad. Even though Shadow Bug Bites do an incredible amount of damage in most matchups, Aegislash in its shield form has an insane defense stat, so unfortunately I'm stuck doing 1 damage per Bug Bite. I'm just going to farm up, firing off this Water Pulse right before my opponent is able to make the back-to-back moves. Water Pulse is going to connect. They're at the back-to-back Shadow Balls, and I have an idea. I'm going to shield the first, and then I'm going to go for the catch onto Diggersby for Shadow Ball number 2. So I shield the first, there's the pivot into Diggersby, and we get the catch. I still have the Fire Punch loaded as well, but my opponent reads the play, they go for the Gyro Ball, and suddenly everything is going wrong. In comes Primeape, Ice Punch takes the knockout, denying my energy, and I send back in the Shadow Araquanid. At the very least, I was able to bait back out the Primeape, but that was a very, very good read from my opponent. I fire off the Bubble Beam. Shadow Bubble Beam will do a little damage onto the Primeape, unfortunately not enough to take the knockout. I just have to fully sacrifice the Araquanid and hope that Shadow Celio can 1v3. In the back, my opponent has a non-Shadow Feraligatr, and somehow, against all odds, this game is not over just yet. Celio lands the Body Slam, Feraligatr gonna farm up to the back-to-back Hydro Cannons, and I will CMP tie. I'm hoping that this Body Slam will be enough to knock out, but in my heart of hearts, I know this is simply not gonna take the KO. Body Slam into Feraligatr is gonna land, Feraligatr survives, and this is pretty rough, because now my opponent can send in the Aegislash. Aegislash should be 9 off the move. Can I make the double surf? No. The game comes down to a 50-50. I build it to the Body Slam plus the surf, and I go for the bait. This is a triple resistant bait. Aegislash puts up the shield and loses charge attack priority. Shadow Celio's about to 1v3. Surf takes the knockout. Down goes Aegislash. Primeape gets farmed down as well. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to the next match, picking up a bit of a tricky lead, Diggersby into Zapdos. On paper, it feels like this should be a dominant matchup for the Diggersby, but Zapdos has identical pacing, they always win charge attack priority, and even though I do double resist the Thunder Shocks, the Drill Pecks hit for massive damage. I'm pretty confident 2 Fire Punches are going to fall short of taking the knockout here, and after the first one lands, I know that now to be the case. However, I can potentially put them into snipe down range for the Shadow Celio. So I farm up, take the Drill Peck, fire off the Fire Punch, and if they survive this, I'm switching. They do. In comes Celio. Celio snipes down, and Zapdos is lost. My opponent sends out Licky Licky, but we've already seen this matchup before. Shadow Celio can put in some very nice work here. I'm just going to go straight for the Surf, guaranteeing big damage or a shield. My opponent puts up the shield. Shadow Ball will not take the knockout, but so far my opponent has had 2 Pokemon that are very, very strong into Shadow Araquanid. That's pretty bad news for me. I'm hoping that maybe it can be something like a Mud Boy in the back where I would have some play with the Araquanid. Celio is never going to be farmed down. My opponent is forced to fire off the Body Slam to take the knockout. I send in Diggersby. I know that I do survive Body Slam, but I'm low enough that I just need to rely on Araquanid to win the game. So in comes Araquanid into the Licky Licky, and whatever they had in back clearly did not want to see the Araquanid, as my opponent will resign the match. Picking up a pretty nice lead in the next match, Diggersby into Shadow Alolan Sandslash. My entire team is winning matchups into Sandslash, so this works out pretty nicely for me. Sandslash goes for the Ice Punch, I return fire with the Fire Punch. Fire Punch is double super effective and my opponent lets it go. In comes Feraligatr, I'm gonna bank a Scorching Sands for later and send in Celio. Celio at the very least does wall off the energy, so does Araquanid, but I'm trusting in the fact that Araquanid is gonna have play in the back. My opponent lands the Hydro Cannon, I return fire with the Body Slam, and so far, this game is off to a pretty good start. I've gotten huge damage on 2 of their Pokemon already, and having that Scorching Sands banked on the Diggersby hopefully will be game winning for me later on. My opponent's Hydro Cannon misses the knockout, the rank 1 Shadow Celio hangs on again. It's a simultaneous switch, and that's not what I was hoping to see, as I end up bringing Shadow Araquanid into a Waterfall Empoleon. I'm just going to go for the Bubble Beam right away. My opponent knows it's only a Bubble Beam, so they will end up no shielding. But after that debuff, I should be in a pretty good spot where I'm very comfortably able to absorb a Drill Peck. My opponent's big issue now in this game is they have no ability to farm down the Araquanid. Debuffed resisted Waterfalls are really not doing a lot of damage. My opponent tries to snipe with the Hydro Cannon on Feraligatr, but instead they just get knocked out by the singular Bug Bite. They're going to wait down the timer, sending back in the Empoleon, but I can instantly reapply that Bubble Beam debuff. To be honest, I'm very pleasantly surprised with how well Shadow Araquanid is handling this matchup. I know normally Empoleon would be on Metal Sound, so the Drill Pecks would be a lot faster, but Shadow Araquanid is still putting in some very nice work. My opponent can just simply never farm down this Araquanid. I get to fire off another Bubble Beam. This should be range where it knocks out. In comes Sandslash. I snipe down with the Mud Shots, and that's going to force out Empoleon's energy. Empoleon will be able to secure the KO here, but I have the Bubble Beam loaded, and I can throw one Bug Bite on the Shadow Araquanid to get just that little bit of extra damage. So in comes Araquanid, one Bug Bite in the Bubble Beam, and that should be game over. Bubble Beam knocks out the Empoleon. Not a good matchup for Shadow Araquanid, but Araquanid found a way to win. Picking up a pretty decent lead in the next match, Diggersby into Wigglytuff. I'm going to throw on 10 here. If my opponent wants to Icy Wind on alignment, they can be my guest. I'm just going to bank all the energy and then hard switch into the Shadow Celio. Shadow Celio up energy is just incredibly strong. I put up the shield as they go for the Swift. And if my opponent stays in, this honestly works out amazingly for me, because now I have a ton of energy on the Diggersby. The Diggersby still has a decent amount of HP remaining either, because Icy Wind doesn't hit too hard. I land the Surf and get the Powder Snow down. I have so much energy now on the Shadow Celio. What does my opponent want to send in? They send in a Talonflame, and this is pretty bad. My team is ABA weak to Talonflame, so I'm going to need Celio to neutralize it. I decide to go for a double bait. If I double bait, I can make 2 Body Slams and a Surf. They shield the first, they call the second, and that is not what I was hoping to see. The good news is the threat of a third charge stack will force out energy from the Talonflame, and now I can send in the Diggersby and go for the Scorching Sands. But I end up 1 turn lagging on Bring-In, allowing them to catch that Scorching Sands onto Quagsire. That is really unfortunate, and now I send in the Shadow Araquanid. It's a non-Shadow Quagsire. I imagine they're probably on Stone Edge if they're non-Shadow, so I put up the shield, get the shield call right, and unfortunately, it looks like I will fall just short of getting the farm down. It would have been close, either a 1 HP survive or maybe damage registration error dependent, so I just fire off the Bubble Beam. At this point, this game is over. Back in comes the Talonflame, but there's no way out. Bubble Beam gets the shield. I can throw 3 Bug Bites, snipe with the Diggersby, and that's going to secure it. As Talonflame is a problem for this team, but Scorching Sands knocks it out and takes the win. Unfortunately, Talonflame is back in the next match as I lead Diggersby into Shadow Talonflame. I save switch into Celio, my opponent responds with Licky Licky, and so far we're off to a pretty rough start. My opponent is very strong into the Shadow Araquanid. I fire off the Surf, Licky Licky will put up the shield, and they're going to fire off energy, but I know that I can always survive whatever they throw. Licky Licky goes for the Shadow Ball, Celio hangs on. Is there ever a chance that I'm able to make a Body Slam after landing the Surf? Surf is going to connect. Shadow Celio, oh my goodness, rank 1 Shadow Celio makes another Body Slam. Will this be enough to secure the knockout? Yes, it is. Back in comes the Talonflame, and this is where things could get a little bit tricky. I send in the Diggersby. I'm just going to need to use Diggersby as a damage sponge here, basically, just to try and get as much damage as I possibly can onto the Talonflame. The Mud Shots are resisted, but they are slowly starting to add up. My opponent does throw an alignment. They wanted to try and pressure a shield, and now I can throw 2 and the Scorching Sands. Scorching Sands not going to take the knockout by any means, but it will be putting that Talonflame critically low. Scorching Sands is going to land. There's a pivot in the back. What is this doing here? There is a Go-Goat. Go-Goat hit with the Fire Punch. I can send in the Shadow Araquanid, and Shadow Araquanid is going to get to go for a full Bug Bite farm down. Go-Goat does have access to Rock Slide. Rock Slide will hit for super effective damage, and now I can farm them down. There was a little bit of lag there, but they send back in the Talonflame, and I should have enough HP remaining on the Shadow Araquanid to make 2 Bubble Beams to win the game. And they're low enough that a Bubble Beam will actually knock them out. They try for the farm down, but Shadow Araquanid hangs on. Bubble Beam number 2 is reached. Talonflame is knocked out, and we're able to survive with the win. We pick up a terrible lead in the next match, Diggersby into Shadow Celio. We've seen how strong Shadow Celio has been all video, and now I'm playing against one, and I am very worried. If I'm not careful, this Shadow Celio will sweep me. I try for a Surf catch, I do not get it, and my opponent has a strong answer for Celio as they bring in Charge-a-Bug. At this point, this game is basically already over. I don't even know if I'm going to see the third. That Shadow Celio up energy is going to absolutely destroy my entire team. I send in Diggersby. Unfortunately, I do get 1 turn bring in there once again, so I only get 2 Mud Shots instead of 3. I don't think that's going to have a material difference on the outcome of this game, though. I just don't think that I can beat that Shadow Celio. Fire Punch will take the knockout. In comes Araquanid. Shadow Celio going to stay on the field, and they have so much energy. They're just going to be able to spam out Body Slam after Body Slam after Body Slam. We've seen a lot of matchups today where the extra damage from Shadow Araquanid ended up winning games, whether it was the 2 damage per Bug Bite into Tinkaton, doing massive damage even when debuffed into a Galarian Moltres. But this is a game, unfortunately, where the lack of bulk on the Shadow Araquanid did cost me, because I just got destroyed by those Body Slams. I send in Diggersby. In the back is Guzzlord. There's no way to win that game, so I will resign the match. Hopping into the final match, we pick up a very strong lead Diggersby into Shadow Fortress. Shadow Fortress very frequently on the lead, so running a lead that is very strong into the Shadow Fortress usually ends up working out pretty well. Here, unfortunately, my opponent actually plays to the CMP tie, so they throw out alignment for no reason, and unfortunately, that's when I threw my Fire Punch, so I don't end up getting a free Mud Shot. My opponent will no shield. I can just farm up, fire off another Fire Punch, and now their fortress is gone, or they're forced to give me a shield. They will protect the fortress. They're going to have to throw energy. I know that I simply don't get knocked out by the Sand Tomb, and I'm just going to look to pivot into the Shadow Celio, because my opponent is very low. In comes Shadow Celio. Celio almost gets the farm down. Whatever they had in back was clearly very weak to Celio, and they will resign the match. All in all, Shadow Araquanid represents a pretty big upgrade over the regular Araquanid, and I think if we see it played going forward, there's kind of no reason to not run the Shadow. In a similar way to how regular Bug Bite Fortress is substantially worse than the Shadow, that Shadow Bug Bite pressure being able to get some very valuable breakpoints in matchups ends up being very game-changing. Especially matchups like Tinkaton, where with a bit of attack on the Shadow Araquanid, you can do 2 damage per Bug Bite instead of 1, and also the Corviknight matchup. Corviknight, if you're running the regular Araquanid, you only deal 1 damage per Bug Bite, and you just get completely destroyed in all shielding scenarios. However, Shadow Araquanid does 2 damage per Bug Bite and does actually have some very interesting bait-dependent win cons. I did do some research before making the video, and the minimum attack stat needed for Shadow Araquanid to get that 2 damage per Bug Bite breakpoint into a rank 1 Tinkaton would be 96.86 attack, but having a little bit more attack than that can help protect you against spreads that have higher defense than the rank 1. But all in all, I feel this is the crown jewel of the new Shadow Pokemon that have been released. The others are kind of more limited metamons at absolute best, but I think Shadow Araquanid could have some anti-meta open grade league play. I do still believe that Shadow Fortress with Bug Bite is generally going to be the Bug Biter of choice. However, for teams in which you already have some weaknesses to fire, if you're wanting a Shadow Bug Biter that does not have a weakness to fire, then I think Shadow Araquanid could be a very strong choice. With how impressive Shadow Bug Bites are now on Araquanid, I don't really think there's ever a need to run Bug Buzz. I think for better play into the steals where your Bug Bites are going to be single or even double resisted, I think that Bubble Beam and Water Pulse is going to be the moveset to go for, because having win cons against Pokemon like Tinkaton and Corviknight that double resist bug damage as a bug water type is honestly just absolutely absurd. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.